is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, August 29th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live, steps, from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Neil J. Young, author of Coming Out Republican, A History of the Gay Right. And later in the show, economics professor Hal Singer joins us to talk about Kamala Harris's economic proposals. Also on the program today, Israel has killed at least 10 Palestinians in a military operation in the illegally occupied West Bank. Dozens more killed in Gaza over the past 24 hours. Also in Gaza, the IDF shot up another clearly marked aid vehicle, this time with the UN World Food Program. It was armored, so no deaths this time, but now they have to pause operations. That is the goal by Israel. Reuters Ipsos polling has Harris up by 13 points with women and Hispanic voters, and up 4 nationally with registered voters. A Fox News poll shows Democrats with double-digit leads in Arizona and Nevada Senate races, and in the North Carolina gubernatorial race against that nutjob, Robinson. Harris and Walz will sit for their first interview as the hers as the first Democrat, first interview as the nominee tonight on CNN with Dana Bash. In Trumpland, Trump posted the literal QAnon catchphrase on Truth Social yesterday. The FBI's investigation, which included interviews with 1,000 people, still finds no motive for the Trump shooter. A new study shows Biden's cap on out-of-pocket prescription costs through Medicare and the Inflation Reduction Act will save seniors $1,000 starting in 2025. The Supreme Court blocks Biden's broad-based student debt relief again. Elon Musk just hired a Republican campaign operative as Brazil's top court threatens to suspend Twitter's operations if they refuse to comply with misinformation guidelines. Brazil is one of the most populous countries on the planet, so that's a pretty big market. Cornell University employees walked off the job yesterday, striking for better pay. A Hong Kong court has convicted 2 journalists in the sedition case, prompting outrage from press freedom advocates. And lastly, newly released research finds that a key journalist covering the Emmett Till lynching in 1956 withheld information about his killers. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. It's been an EmMajority Report week. Sam will be back next week. Say hello to Matt and Bradley.
Hello.
And Bradley silently waves. Hello over there. So let's just dive right into it. We actually recorded our conversation with Hal Singer on Kamala Harris's economic agenda earlier this morning. So it's a great conversation. I'm looking forward to you guys hearing it. But let's turn our attention to the West Bank here, because as the genocide continues in Gaza, the IDF just undertook the largest military action that Israel has done in the illegally occupied West Bank since 2002, so since over 2 decades. This is a major escalation. Obviously, Hamas is not in the West Bank, does not govern the West Bank. On purpose, by the way. Israel has in order to thwart Palestinian self-determination, has purposefully wanted the governing structures of Gaza and of the West Bank to be different, because it undercuts solidarity for the Palestinian cause. So you can't say this is Hamas. You just can't. The hostages aren't there. And they've killed at least 10 people. So this is illegal under international law. You cannot wage war on people that you were occupying. Not that Israel cares. The Biden administration responded by announcing sanctions against certain Israeli settlers and an Israeli NGO. Stop me if you've heard this before.
Let's see the follow through on even those limited announcements.
Yeah, we'll play a clip in a sec of Eli Clifton of the Quincy Institute and his view on this. But yeah, I mean, what Matt's saying, it's just this NGO that is in question here, that's being sanctioned, is called Hashamar Yosh. It is an extremist settler organization that has been funded by the Israeli government. It's tied to...
Which means we fund it.
Right. It's tied to Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in particular. The Israeli government, through this NGO, basically pays to have volunteers go to, quote, agricultural outposts in the occupied West Bank, and then they preside over like thousands of acres of stolen Palestinian land, and they just keep expanding, right? And this is why you see things like settler attacks like this. Let's play number 3 here. Here's a good example before we get to that analysis of what happens. It's quotidian in the West Bank. This is footage of some of these settlers harassing this Palestinian man and his family. This is on August 4th. So you can see
next time
the
someone touches
yeah.
him, my cows.
Why your cows came here?
Why cows? Because this is my land.
But this is my house.
I was given it by God and
Shame,
Abraham,
shame,
Isaac, Yaakov.
shame. Hey,
Shut
no,
the fuck up.
this is my house.
Not your house.
This is okay. That's your house. Okay, you.
Tell your crazy witch to go to fuck to the house. Let's go.
Where?
Let's go right now.
Sure.
What
you want?
No, I want to dance with you, man.
Dance with
I
me?
want to dance with you. You look.
I'm not your bitch.
You look sweet. You are my bitch. And you look sweet, you know? You look so fresh, so sweet. I will be happy to sit with you in a jail someday. I will be happy. You know Seder man? Seder man? Honest לשם שמיים, מה שנאמר.
So he says they're rape in the name of God. If you could just go back for a sec, so I could read that. For the podcast audience, this is it's an interaction between these, yeah, here we go. He's getting in his face.
Be happy to sit with you in a jail someday.
I'd be happy to sit with you in jail someday. I would be happy, Seder man. Rape in the name of God, as they say. You understand what I mean. And then he makes a kissy face. So that is, Seder man is the torture camp where they had been raping Palestinians.
Not that any of our mainstream media would let you know about that.
Nope. No screams without words on this extremely well-documented systemic rape in Israel, even though you can go and read the long Human Rights Watch report, which is a very mainstream... Cautious,
perhaps overly so on this issue, and yet the type of things they're describing look like hell, look like a inner circle of like Dante's Inferno. What people hanging from hooks, like the amount of imposed silence on this from particularly the New York Times, but the rest of the main papers that have reporters and the major news networks is just it's unbearably appalling. Shocking and terrifying, frankly.
And so so he's basically threatening that guy in the West Bank there, that it'll subject him to what the prisoners from Gaza have been experiencing. And, they bulldoze their homes and take them and take their land. And that's what this NGO, to bring it back to that, is basically tasked with. And Israeli money goes to that, or Israeli government money, meaning our money in part, goes to these efforts. And so they actually, it's quite cheap for them, right? Because they just subsidize these volunteers who want to do this. They are brainwashed. They are fascists. They enjoy the pain, as you could see in that video, that they're inflicting upon Palestinians as they take their land because it's their right. So, like, these sanctions,
to the Bible.
In theory, these sanctions could be like, so Israel, if you continue to fund this settler NGO, the government, you could be subjected to sanctions too because it's illegal, right? That's in theory. But I have to say that because this group has already been targeted by Biden sanctions earlier in the year, and they violated it and nothing happened. Because without an arms embargo, without sanctioning the Israeli government, this will continue. Now, don't take it from me. Well, I would love to ask a journalist to be able to ask the State Department about this, by the way, because there hasn't been a briefing in nearly 2 weeks. But here's Eli Clifton of the Quincy Institute appearing on Al Jazeera English, and he's asked about it, and his analysis is correct.
How effective do you think the sanctions will be in deterring violence in the occupied West Bank?
Thanks for having me. Well, I mean, there's no evidence that these sanctions to date have deterred settler violence at all. But they do serve a couple of important roles. They do offer a fig leaf for both the IDF's complicitness in enabling and protecting settlers to act with impunity. And, perhaps more importantly for the Biden administration here, it attempts to preempt questions for them about U.S. military aid to Israel and the decision not to designate specific IDF units as participating in human rights abuses. Now, that's a designation that could lead to the use of U.S. law, the Leahy law, to withhold weapons transfers to those units. So those pressures, they're particularly acute.
So that's key here, right? This is what the strategy is to basically say, oh, this is a non-governmental organization. We'll sanction them. It can't be that this is official Israeli policy. If they were to target the IDF, then they would be like, oh, our whole State Department review where we said that we don't have to hold up weapons to Israel based on the Leahy law because the Leahy law would trigger a stoppage if Israel were to have been found in violation of a humanitarian law. We would show that we were lying about that if we were to sanction anybody who is actually officially in the government. But like, as I just mentioned, this NGO is an arm of the government, and it's an arm of specifically Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and their agenda.
Settlers are independent contractors in the enterprise of ethnic cleansing.
Exactly. Well, put even better than I could have said it. Clearly, because that didn't come out great either. But
I got the benefit of hearing you describe it first.
All right.
To withhold weapons transfers to those units. So those pressures, they're particularly acute right now in the final months of the U.S. presidential campaign season. So what you're saying
is the U.S. just doing this sort of as a distraction then?
Well, I think it partly as a distraction and partially to manage a difficult situation when you have 44% of likely Democratic voters opposing U.S. military aid to Israel, at least in terms of its war against Hamas, with only 25% in favor. So they have to do something, but they don't want to do something that actually could have long-term effects on the U.S.-Israel relationship.
Why now, though? Because there's years of accumulated evidence that this particular organization has been funded and supported by the Israeli government, as well as senior members of the NGO are affiliated with the parties of the ultra-nationalist ministers like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who, as you know, have called for violence against Palestinians. So why now?
Well, I think that, we're facing unusual pressure right now for the administration to do something, because not just in the presidential election cycle, but there's also a growing concern that the war in Gaza and now the expansion of the military actions by the IDF into or broadening their activities in the West Bank could actually pose to be a spark to light a regional war. And so there certainly is a strong desire in Washington to prevent that, but there's also competing pressures not to do something that would fundamentally change the U.S.-Israel relationship. Now, all of this is coming at the expense of U.S. policy in the region that could actually help de-escalate tensions with Iran and Hezbollah and could help bring a ceasefire in Gaza and a release of hostages. And those are policies that wouldn't only benefit people in the region, but it would also serve U.S. national security interests of avoiding getting drawn into another endless war in the Middle East. So unfortunately, the policies and the sanctions that were just announced, it's to present the appearance of doing something, to express disapproval with what's happening, but not to actually take the types of actions that Democratic voters would want and are pushing the president to undertake, but also the types of actions that could actually make a difference in Israeli policy in the West Bank as well as in Gaza.
Look, speaking of
it's a accurate explanation that I appreciated, and I'd also say that these actions in the West Bank are so provocative that we know what Netanyahu wants to do, and he wants to drag the United States into a war. He wants to capitalize on this time period to potentially give, if Harris were to win, or whoever wins, Trump or Harris, no choice but to essentially back Israel in some broadened military campaign. These are literally the West Bank, and taking this action is designed to provoke Hezbollah, given Hezbollah's regional proximity to the West Bank as relative to Gaza as well. Not that anyone can access Gaza because it's an open-air prison, but in terms of the West Bank, they want rocket attacks from Hezbollah coming over for that very reason, because if that were to happen and there were to be escalation, what have we seen from the Biden administration that would indicate that they wouldn't defend Israel to that degree? That's Netanyahu. Sorry,
I was just saying zero.
I mean, Netanyahu wants. Netanyahu is risking his own citizenry for his own political ambitions and for the genocide.
And it's working.
Yes,
he's politically stronger now than he was. So all the crocodile tears you hear from liberal Zionists who are like, look, I support Israel and like the two-state solution, and I don't like Bibi. Well, guess what? You're strengthening Bibi Netanyahu. So yes. Good job on that. That's along with all the Palestinians that this tepid half measure has gotten killed. You've also strengthened the guy you supposedly don't like. So
that's a key point that Matt is making. He has actually solidified his position over the past few months. The opposition that was polling better than him has kind of fallen by the wayside because people are like, well, you know, I like the strong guy, and Israelis. Why
would I go with these pussies?
Right. That's it. Which is incredible. So this bear hug strategy was really just a frickin' hug, and it's emboldened Netanyahu. So insanity. All right, folks, quick break and a word from one of our sponsors. And when we get back, we'll be speaking with Neil J. Young.
Hey, folks. It's almost like a famous story now. But when I started this program, people were saying, hey, why don't you have a merch store? And I would say under my breath, no friggin' way, because it's too much pain to set up. And I won't be able to keep track of things. I just don't want to do it. Well, I got to say, I'm so glad we did. Right now, we're selling those Vergonia T-shirts with the flag until September 6th, in fact. And the hardest part about putting this up into our store was just getting the idea. Once we had the idea, it was super easy, and that's what Shopify does for us. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real life store stage, all the way to we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify is there to help you grow. This is the thing. It doesn't matter whether you're selling soap or whether you're selling outdoor outfits or Vergonia T-shirts. Shopify helps you sell everywhere. And I mean everywhere. IRL, their in-person point of sale system. It could be on any type of social media platform. Shopify has got you covered. And Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers. They have the internet's best converting checkout, 30% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. And Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds and Rothy's and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across, believe this, 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow with Shopify. Check out ours, shop.majorityreportradio.com. Honestly, if I had known that that Shopify could make things this easy, I would have done this years and years and years ago. I don't know if Shopify was around at that time. Maybe it was, but I wish I knew about it because it makes it really easy. You can sign up for a $1 a month trial period at shopify.com/majority, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/majority right now to grow your business. No matter what stage you're in, shopify.com/majority. We'll put the link in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. And now,
we are back, and we are joined now by Neil J. Young, writer and author of Coming Out Republican, A History of the Gay Right. Neil, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, the Gay Republican, how do you start your history of the Gay Republican? Where is the first kind of marker that you'd like to throw down in terms of the conservative movement and gay people or LGBTQ plus people within that movement?
Yeah, I mean, when I set out to write the book, I thought that it would start in the late 1970s because that's when the first gay Republican organizations were formed. But as I dug into the research, I realized I actually wanted to begin in the 1950s, in the era of the Cold War, and this period that was known as the Lavender Scare, where the federal government was, repressing homosexuals all over the country, was criminalizing their behavior, arresting them. But I realized there was a lot of prominent, very closeted, but important gay Republican activists, both in Washington, D.C., who were, fundamental to the rise of modern conservatism, and also folks who were out in California, where a lot of my book is set, who were starting to be politically active, but were doing so, again, as closeted or semi-closeted gay Republicans.
The Lavender Scare, can you expand on that? And what were the origins of that moral panic, basically?
Yeah. So in the 1950s, at the height of the Cold War, there were, huge fears that the country was under communist threat and that subversives within the nation would betray the country to the communists. And so there was, the Red Scare, which was about rooting out communists from the U.S. and especially in the federal government, this idea that they were in the State Department, that they were turning over state secrets to the communists, to the Soviet Union. But there was also this idea that homosexuals were a subversive threat to the nation, because the idea was that homosexuals were very likely to be turned. This notion was that they were sexual deviants, and so they could also become political deviants. They would be easily turned into communists, and that they would serve as spies within the federal government, especially the State Department. And so both political parties were very committed to rooting out homosexuals from any service in the federal government. But that spirit and even that sort of political effort bled out to all over the country. So local law enforcement in every city was, interested in finding homosexuals, arresting them, criminalizing them, and really ruining their lives. And this was a horrific and really invasive work on the part of the government to criminalize and ruin homosexuals' lives in the mid 20th century.
How were laws deployed in that way? I mean, were there a lot, we see in the context particularly of abortion right now, like the reuse, the re-upping of anti, of pro-censorship or laws that are supposed to regulate basically people from being deviant in any way. What were some of those tactics that law enforcement used?
Yeah, so this started at, at the top. President Eisenhower issued an executive order in 1950 that, that oversaw the government's work in rooting out homosexuals from government employment. But, at the state and local level, there were all sorts of vice laws that had to do with things like gross indecency or public indecency. And these gave law enforcement and police huge leeway to arrest people that they suspected of being homosexual. I mean, they didn't even have to necessarily catch someone in the act, but often they saw, groups of men walking down the street, or if you were sitting in a park, you could be arrested on charges of gross indecency. And so those are just sort of some examples, but I also think it's really important to know that every department, every agency of the government was really devoted to this. This included the U.S. Post Office. The Post Office was in coordination with the FBI, was surveilling people that they suspected of being homosexual, watching their mail, tracing it. If you subscribe to a physique magazine, or if they noticed that you were writing a lot, if you were a single man and you were writing a lot of letters to other single men, they would put trackers on those other men's mail. And so, and if they suspected of them being homosexual from the mail they were writing or the mail they were receiving, they would turn their names over to law enforcement and have them arrested. And so I think people don't appreciate or really know this history of how extensive law enforcement and the federal government network was in finding homosexuals and arresting them, criminalizing them, and again, ruining their lives.
And I have so many questions. One is, I noticed the focus on men, right?
Yes.
This moral panic being fairly directed towards homosexual men. But also when you mention the FBI and its role in having the post office track individuals in this manner. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover, if you could just talk about him and his sexuality and how that played into his obsessiveness on topics of this matter.
Yeah, I mean, so he's very important here, obviously directing a lot of this work. And, you know, historians have weighed in, including Beverly Gage's recent biography of him, that, you know, says that he very likely was involved in a long-term relationship with a male that was very close to him and that worked with him. And I think that there's a lot of sort of figures in this period who we view, I think rightly so, as hypocrites because of the way in which they were living their lives one way, but directing the government to repress homosexuals' lives. And so I think that just sort of speaks to the nature of the fear that was at work in this period and how overwhelming the sort of spirit of the lavender scare was. But it is important to know that and to recognize that there were homosexual men who facilitated that lavender scare. And I think a lot of them, such as Hoover, did so to direct attention away from them.
Right. And the focus on men, you know, I think about often, like, we're in the midst of an anti-trans moral panic, and so much of it is about trans women, right? The idea that somebody who was born with male genitalia is actually a woman is so threatening to this cultural conception of masculinity. And I think that pairs nicely, I mean, not nicely, but in the way that the moral panic or the lavender scare and the crackdown that resulted is focused on men and homosexual behavior there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart connection. And I would say that, you know, in a patriarchal society, which the U.S. is, and particularly so in the mid-20th century, fears about manhood and masculinity really shape a lot of governmental action. And I think also just like cultural responses to changing, you know, gender expressions and changing sexual norms. And so, you know, lesbians certainly had difficult experiences during the lavender scare, and they were also targeted as well, but not at all to the extent that gay men were. And part of that was that gay men tended to have a lot more public lives. Like, they tended to be a lot more sort of out in the open to the extent that closeted persons were at all. And so that's part of it. But I think at the deeper level, it is this sort of panic around manhood and masculinity. And again, what that meant in the Cold War context, right? We're in this arms race with another nation. We're worried about the future of our society and our nation and our strength at home, because that sort of registers on the world stage. And I think that's how these things sort of got tied together.
I mean, it occurs to me, and I want to move past the 1950s in a second, but that this is really, honestly, the birth of the modern conservative movement that we see to this day, of the linking of anti-communism, which ends up being free market fundamentalism for them, with a social conservatism that was about cracking down on gay people, on lifestyles that they deem outside of the mainstream, or and also, of course, married with their anti-civil rights agenda. I mean, you can see that is the Republican Party really to this day.
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right here to point to this moment in which those different components of the right, which aren't necessarily affiliated with the Republican Party in the 1950s, are starting to get stitched together into what we would call the new right in the 1970s, which is this broad coalition of different sorts of conservatives who are linked together in a national movement. A lot of this work is happening at the grassroots level, right? Connecting cultural conservatives to anti-communists to free market radicals, and stitching it together into what we really recognize as a coordinated Republican Party, especially around like the 1980 election and the rise of Ronald Reagan. But absolutely, it's getting forged in the 1950s in the height of the Cold War. It's sort of amping up through the 1960s and the cultural transformations of that era, and really, I think, coalescing in a 1970s movement of grassroots conservatives that has like a religious right that's ascendant.
Yes, and so let's go to the 1970s, right, where the backlash against the revolutions, the civil rights advancements of the 1960s, as well as massive cultural changes of with feminism and progress in those areas. You see the 1970s as an era of backlash, right? And the expansion really of the government's role in basically like being tough on crime, the federal government's role, whether it be the origins of the drug war as a way to have that backlash formalized against often Black and brown people in this country, but as well as it relates to gay people and using the federal government to crack down on gay folks. What was the role of the gay Republican during that era?
Yeah, because this is a period in which part of what's happening is the development of an anti-LGBTQ, but at the time it would have been known as an anti-gay politics that's taking shape in the mid-1970s. You think about 1969 Stonewall. Is this turning point in gay history where so many people start coming out of the closet. And also in the early 1970s, a lot of cities and local municipalities start passing these non-discrimination laws that are tied to homosexuality, towards gay identity. And so that's sort of happening in the early 70s. In the mid-1970s, you have this religious right movement that's just starting to form. They're starting to get united around an anti-abortion cause, but they're also recognizing that sort of gay rights are moving forward. And so there's this backlash effort of anti-LGBTQ stuff that's happening in the late 1970s. This is the moment in which gay Republicans really come out of the closet and start organizing. And there's a particular reason they do so, which is here in California, where I live. In 1977, there's a state ballot initiative that's put forward by a very conservative state legislator from Orange County named John Briggs. And it was Proposition 6, or as it was commonly known, the Briggs Initiative, which was on the 1978 California state ballot. And had it passed, it would have made it illegal for any gay or lesbian person to work in the state's public school system. And so this is the moment in which gay Republicans recognize they have to come out of the closet. They have to start organizing as gay Republicans to defeat this ballot initiative, but also to show the Republican Party, especially in the state of California, hey, we belong to your party. We're Republicans. We believe in, the Republican Party's traditional message of freedom, opportunity, and equality. And we're not only going to defeat this ballot initiative, we're going to push out who are these Bible beaters that are trying to come into our party? Who is this religious right that thinks that they're Republicans? We're going to push them out of the party and make sure they never get a foothold. And so that's the moment in which this is happening really in California, but they are developing a movement that ultimately spreads across the nation as these gay Republicans say, we belong to this party. We're not going to see it change in the direction that it seems to be going.
They were not successful.
They were not.
It's almost as if that you can't make progress in that regard in this party that targets marginalized people broadly. But it's fascinating that the California element to me.
Yeah.
Harvey Milk, of course, in the 1970s becomes the first openly gay elected official in the country and is assassinated. talk about the role of the San Francisco politics of that time period as well in fostering that backlash within California Republicans.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about Harvey Milk, because one of the most surprising and just wonderful things I discovered as I was in the archives, actually in San Francisco, looking at the papers of the first gay Republican club that was started, which at the time was called Concerned Republicans for Individual Rights. It's now known as Log Cabin Republicans of San Francisco. It's been around since 1977. Harvey Milk was involved with the founding of this organization. He was at the first meeting of this organization because Harvey Milk, although he was a Democrat, he believed that gay people had to, first of all, come out of the closet, and they had to show both political parties that they belonged to them. This idea was none of us are being well represented. And honestly, the Democratic Party wasn't all that much better on gay rights or accepting gay members in the 1970s than the Republicans were. And so there was this notion that this sort of bipartisan organizational effort needed to happen. We'll belong to both. We already belong to both parties, right? We will show ourselves to be visible within both parties. And through that, we will make gay rights, we'll progress gay rights, and we'll show that gay rights are a bipartisan issue or ideally nonpartisan issue. In San Francisco, it was also really interesting to discover that the local leadership of the Republican Party was incredibly supportive of the formation of these gay Republican clubs, because Republicans were basically so underrepresented in the city. Not many people in San Francisco were registered as Republicans. Republicans didn't have any political offices. And so the Republican leadership there thought, well, maybe the path forward is us tapping into this very large population of homosexuals who live in this city, getting them to register with the Republican Party, and hopefully electing local officials. And so San Francisco is this sort of unique spot in California in many ways, but particularly in the ways that it actually is the birthplace of gay republicanism, which I think most people wouldn't think of. The Republican Party at the state level in California, and certainly in Southern California that was much more conservative, was not nearly as welcoming or as encouraging as of this development of gay Republicans. But San Francisco, because of the nature of its politics, and because of the fact that Republicans were so underrepresented, it really became, for many years, the sort of central, the nexus of gay republicanism, and certainly formed the sort of foundation upon which the larger movement was built.
And you could probably put a pin there and say this is the original infrastructure for passing Proposition 8. I mean, right? In 2008, was that when the Prop 8 passed? I know we're skipping ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think that yes, and I also think the important thing to point to is California again. Like, California is this place of progress, and also this place where we see conservative backlash happening again and again around LGBTQ issues. And there's this old saying that's used a lot in American politics, which is, "As California goes, so goes the nation." This idea that this state, the largest state in the country, is sort of leading indicator of what's going to happen in the country politically. And I think that's right. But I also think that this sort of narrative of progress and backlash that you see over and over again in California is represents the sort of larger development within the country of progress and backlash when it comes to LGBTQ rights. So California, is one of those leading states when it comes to the passage of same-sex marriage. And also it's a place that sort of immediately generates an enormous backlash that becomes a really defining one for the country as, Prop 8 is passed and this huge progressive measure is overturned. And that's seen as like decimating to the development of same-sex marriage rights for the entire country, as it is for a short period of time.
And who's governor of California during this time period? One Ronald Reagan. I guess that we could talk about Reaganism, how that relates to gay Republicans and gay rights in this period. And also, I guess if you could expand a little bit more on who the log cabin Republicans were as they become a faction within the GOP.
Yeah, so in the late 1970s, the folks who are forming these gay Republican clubs, which are, most of them have sort of log cabin in their name. And of course, that's a reference to Abraham Lincoln, who they believe they are in the sort of true tradition of. They tend to, it's like 99% of these clubs are white gay men. They're almost all entrepreneurs or small business owners or professional types, lawyers, businessmen. In a lot of ways, they look like the average Republican man, other than their sexual identity. But they tend to have a very sort of conservative fiscal policy, even as they want the the Republican Party and the government to change around sort of issues of gay rights. But they really argue that they're libertarians, right? And they have this idea of like, the government should stay out of my bedroom and out of my wallet. And that a smaller government, a restrained government that has less power, is the pathway to freedom. So that's the message that they're developing in the late 1970s. And certainly that's what they believe the Republican Party stands for. But as you note, this guy, Ronald Reagan, who had sort of governed as one way as California governor, he's going to be very different once he becomes president of the US in the 1980s, particularly because why does he win his election? In large part because social conservatives, the religious right, bands behind him and makes him president. And so he acts very differently in the 1980s. And also we have the rise of HIV/AIDS happening. So that's changing all the politics here. And in a lot of ways, I think it's catching these gay Republicans by surprise and turning their party into something that, they certainly don't stand for and they really don't recognize.
There's so much here. There's the identity of gay Republicans in the sense that, like, does white man come first?
Right.
Right. And then, of course, there's the Reaganism element and the reactionary backlash to HIV/AIDS and his essentially allowance of HIV/AIDS to spread because basically it's God's will telling gay people that you're wrong, and so it's a pandemic for gay people to punish them, I guess. That was basically the way that Reagan approached it. And then also, you have Ed Koch in New York City too, right? Who was a gay man himself.
Right.
And how he bought into this as well. This is barely a question, but if you could just talk about that period.
Well, it's an incredibly important era of American history, and particularly of the modern GOP, because, and there's folks like Gary Bauer and Pat Buchanan who are high-ranking Reagan White House officials who are like hardline conservatives, and they are really pushing the sort of ugly anti-gay politics that we see emerging, particularly in the late 1980s around HIV/AIDS. And one of the things that I found really fascinating was, if you look at public polling around homosexuality in the early 80s, it's a lot higher in terms of levels of acceptance than I think we would have imagined for that period. But what happens is the HIV/AIDS crisis becomes sort of so overwhelming, and social conservatives really use it to ramp up a new wave of homophobia within the Republican Party, but across the nation more broadly. And those public attitudes about homosexuality, they plummet in the second half of the 1980s. And I think importantly for the sort of trajectory of the Republican Party, you see the reemergence and the reinvigoration of social conservatism in the late 1980s, early 1990s that becomes really ugly, becomes really anti-gay and really vicious. And of course, that affects the anti-abortion efforts and all sorts of other hardline social conservatism that's happening in the late 1980s that really leads to sort of the ugliness of the 1990s. And I think actually puts the Republican Party in the trajectory that we see today with the anti-trans stuff.
You also mentioned in talking about California, the origination of gay people being threats to children in schools, I guess being formalized within Republican circles. You can see that obviously today with the DeSantis politics.
Right, exactly. This groomer discourse. So that was very much part of the, Proposition 6, the Briggs Initiative. It was also coming out of Florida with Anita Bryant and her work in Miami-Dade County to overturn a gay rights ordinance there. This idea that, and Anita Bryant said this, and this became sort of the talking point of the nation, or the talking point of the right, was that homosexuals couldn't reproduce, so they had to recruit. And who better to do that than public school teachers who spend all day with your son and your daughter? And so I think all listeners can hear the resonance and the relevance of that old discourse to what's happening right now, and the panics around schools and classrooms and elementary education, and all the ways in which DeSantis, I think, tapped into and revived those notions of a groomer panic. And now, of course, it's like, in some ways, it's like detached from homosexuality itself, but like, I think that is obviously the origin of it, and remains sort of like, I think, the central nerve of that panic is this idea that particularly homosexual men and women are a threat, and they're predators, right, to your children. And so, this stuff doesn't go away. It just sort of gets refreshed and remade for new moments.
And I guess this is around the time, too, where gay people really begin organizing for their rights, as of course they would, given the just absolute trauma of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and the lack of political will to help gay people as a protected group, or LGBTQ plus people. And how did that begin to happen? Because like, even in the 90s, Bill Clinton signing Don't Ask, Don't Tell into law, Biden, our current president, supportive of that as well. Like, this is, as you say, Democrats were not good on this. Like, how did the organizing begin?
Not at all. And, even like Sam Nunn, who's, the ranking Democratic leader on the Senate, the military committee, puts forward Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So Democrats are not doing well on this at all. And I think that, again, the panic over HIV/AIDS as this public health threat shaped so much politics, and it was shaping politics both among Republicans and Democrats. But gay people were organizing nevertheless. And I think because of all this, because of the oppression, and because of the real bigotry of this era, a lot of that organization is happening on the left. It's happening through gay democratic organizations. It's also happening through these sort of mainstream gay organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and other organizations like that. But I think that you see a real recognition from gay people in this period of how bad they've got it, and also of how high the stakes are, particularly around a public health crisis. And also, they don't want to go back to where things were just a couple of decades ago. And it really seems like that's a possibility, right? We're not that far away from people living their lives completely in the closet. And I think in the 1990s, people really woke up and recognized. And so you have the March on Washington in 1993, where 1 million LGBTQ people come out. That is an incredibly significant moment, and of showing, visibility, of showing presence, of showing how large a population this is. And so for all the backlash, all the repression, and all the hate that's developing in this decade, I also think you see a huge commitment from LGBTQ people to not be silenced and to not be brought backwards.
And we are in another moment of reaction. So I guess we'll just take it to the present day as we wrap up here, Neil. The anti-trans backlash, the anti-groomer backlash from Republicans. I mean, some of these figures, like we had an IM write in saying, Laib Habibi says, Roy Cohn was a mentor to Trump at the center of of North, the Red and Lavender scares, and a homosexual himself. He's dead now, but this is not far in the past. And you mentioned Caitlyn Jenner, right, as a figure, almost as like a log cabin and trans person, right? And we have guys like, who knows? We don't know for sure, but Lindsey Graham and other Republicans and other people who play this role to this day. So to bring it to the present, here, Neil. What is your view of this moment of reactionary sentiment?
Well, I think for, all the progress that has been made, and it has been significant. I mean, and also in a short period of time, it's also, as you say, important for us to remember that that progress has not been around for very long. And so the potential for backlash and really regression here is enormous. And I think we see that in the current efforts around the anti-trans stuff. Gay Republicans argue, because they've supported a lot of the stuff of stuff Ron DeSantis has done and others have done, that Trump has done, that is, anti-trans efforts. They've said, well, these are sort of limited, narrow pieces of legislation that are, that make sense for the particular thing they're targeting. And the thing that I asked over and over again of the contemporary gay Republicans I interviewed was, are you not worried of where this is headed? And none of them are. And I think that that is very naive of them, because if anything, history shows us that these things are not disconnected, they're actually deeply woven together. And that the anti-LGBTQ movement has always been very coordinated. And it wasn't interested in just sort of, nitpicking an issue or two here or there and reforming it, but actually of pushing history backwards. And so I think that that's the thing we all have to be mindful of and aware of where this is potentially headed.
Neil J. Young, the book is called Coming Out, A History of the Gay Right, Coming Out Republican, A History of the Gay Right. Thank you so much for coming on today. We will put a link to your book in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Agreed. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, you will hear my discussion with Hal Singer about Kamala Harris's economic proposals. We are back, and we are joined now by Hal Singer, professor in the economics department at the University of Utah, managing director at Econ One, and the executive director of the Utah Project, which is an institute studying antitrust and consumer protection. Hal, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me.
So let's just start here, because inflation is the refrain that you hear all the time when people in the media are talking about the economy. And of course, we've gone through this on the show before. There was naturally occurring inflation in the pandemic because our supply chains were disrupted. There were work stoppages, and prices did go up during the pandemic. But now in specific sectors, like housing and groceries and meat, they've stayed up and profits have soared for these companies. The Harris platform seems to understand that, but the media doesn't cover that at all. If you could just do some myth busting here for us.
Yeah, thanks for that one. Yeah, I hope we can talk about price gouging. It seems like a very sensitive subject these days. In fact, The Economist magazine said that if we even utter the words, we could undermine the faith and the
Can we pull up your tweet on this? I'm sorry to cut you off immediately, but this was incredible. You highlighted this. This was a sentence in The Economist, this part here. The claim of price gouging is simply not supported by the evidence, but it nonetheless erodes the faith in open markets that makes America prosperous. So, according to The Economist, talking about price gouging is wrong because capitalism, people may start to think critically about it. I don't know.
Who knew that they were such snowflakes, right? I mean, we should tread delicately here because I don't want the entire financial market to collapse around our conversation of price gouging.
Yeah.
But let's go for it anyway. Yeah, it almost was something that couldn't be discussed in the media. You know, the media has their favorite kind of neoliberal commentators. They go back to the same ones. I don't know if I should name any names on the show, but these guys just can't bring themselves to even accept for a moment the possibility that the firms in charge of setting prices, in consolidated industries with massive price setting power, could have any culpability in driving inflation. And the other thing that would kind of cause me to go mad, as you mentioned, we did have this burst of inflation that was endemic, kind of economy-wide. But afterwards, we only saw it kind of lingering in very specific sectors. And yet the Fed took this position like this is just any kind of old inflation. We should address it by throwing sand in the gears of the economy. It was pretty clear where it was coming from. It's like a fire in your house. You identify where the fire is. You don't bulldoze the house. You go look and you find the room where the fire is. And you take it out. So we had it in just a few sectors. Housing accounted for a third, as you know, of the entire CPI. And we have this crazy mechanism that says we're gonna treat the cost of owned homes as if the imputed value is the rental thing. So rental drives everything in housing. And now we learn, and we've known this for a while, that the rental markets in the United States have been subject to a massive, alleged, I should say, price fixing conspiracy, right? And so, the idea that firms had no culpability in driving inflation is just nuts. And sadly, I think the only reason why economists can't say it, not all, but most, particularly those who kind of play in this industrial organization space and get quoted all the times, I worry that they are in a constant audition mode for corporate consulting gigs. And if you bite the hand that feeds you, you're not going to be able to sustain your customary lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean that does seem to be at play here for sure. And you mentioned the digital price fixing done by RealPage. I guess that's a great place to start. Where a lot of these companies, I guess this RealPage is software. It's owned by a private equity firm, and there are estimates that in certain metro areas of the country, it's 70% of large apartment buildings are using this software called RealPage, where it's essentially a digital price fixing scheme by these companies where they come together, they put their information into software, and they basically artificially say like, hey, we don't need to compete with each other. We can set the prices for rent here, and we'll all make a boatload of money, even though that's like basically artificially working together in an illegal way. So that's why the DOJ filed this antitrust lawsuit on Friday. This was a part of what Harris proposed, right? Cracking down on corporate landlords. This was in her platform that she rolled out. So for me, if this is continuity from the Biden administration with Jonathan Cantor and Lena Khan, that would be encouraging. But I guess, Hal, what's your take on this lawsuit, what it means for her platform if she were to win, and her agenda if she were to win in November?
Yeah, well, the lawsuit's huge. And you hit on a few of the aspects, but just let me tell you, coming from an antitrust perspective, what's really pernicious here, what's really dangerous, is the sharing of competitively sensitive information across what should be horizontal rivals, two different landlords competing with each other in theory in the same neighborhood. They're sharing with each other through this intermediary their vacancy rates, and then they're basically, the second thing that's offensive is they're turning over their pricing decision to a third party, which is suggesting to them, by how much they should go up in the rent. And you mentioned the 70% number. I don't think you'd need to get to 70% of a neighborhood or of a city before you can effectuate, a price fixing conspiracy that touches everyone, right? That is, even the landlords who aren't using RealPage, they see all their rivals going up by 14, 15, some ungodly, percentage each year. Why not do it? Why not just follow that umbrella and go under this higher prices? And it leads to, massive price inflation across the board. And we've known this is going on. By the way, the DOJ was a bit late to the party. There's been private plaintiffs who have already filed against RealPage. This is no surprise. And what was amazing, I just go back to the mainstream, kind of the economists, the neoliberals. Paul Krugman, God bless him, was bending over backwards to come up with alternative theories as to why prices were exploding in rental markets. And his theory, his pet theory, and he wrote at least 5 times stories about this, that the pandemic caused the demand for more space to go up because we were no longer working in buildings downtown, right? We're working out of our homes, so we needed bigger homes, and that's what was driving.
I mean,
inflation.
he was like, there were a lot of people in the economy who don't have that luxury, like people who make wages, as opposed to Krugman, who could maybe do it from his vacation home or something like that. I mean, so much of this working from home stuff, like analysis of the economy, that also feels like it's to benefit corporate landlords who want people to return to the office space that they rented already.
And my second favorite theory, just to pick on the New York Times, I love them so dearly, but after Paul Krugman's, more demand to accommodate COVID, they ran with an editorial anyways, an op-ed on the elevator union. And if it was basically the elevator unions to blame, they were intransigent. They were digging in their heels for higher wages, and that was causing inflation to spiral out in rental. It's been a lot to take, but I go on walks and stuff just to cool down. I'm waiting for them to come to the light and see what really was driving it. I'm not sure that they're there yet. Hopefully they're following this lawsuit though.
Well, what do you think? I mean, from a political perspective, the Democrats are gleaning from this, because I mean, the interest rates. I mean, it's finally been announced that they're going to. It had been anticipated, but in September they're finally going to cut rates at the Fed. But like, what's fascinating to see is how some, Biden administration, to their credit, and Harris continuing with this, doesn't seem to be taking the bite on this like hysteria in the media, or not taking the bite, taking the bait on this hysteria in the media, because like it doesn't really, if they don't crack down on them, they're just going to blame inflation and say that the Democrats can't manage the economy, right? And it's going to harm them regardless. So it's almost like they have to be more aggressive, and perhaps they've learned something in this regard, because then it's already baked into the cake that the Republicans tend to pull better on managing the economy than the Democrats do. So then when they get in power and corporations take advantage of them, then there's inflation in these certain sectors, and then they get hit on it politically. So it's like they're cornered into acting to at least a certain degree. And you have to credit, of course, Lena Khan and how Warren and stuff got Biden to put her in charge of the FTC. But that's one thing that I'm encouraged by in all of this.
Oh, when I say the Democratic Party was controlled by neoliberal economic thought for decades. I think that coming out of probably the 70s and 80s and the Carter experience. But, the idea was that they would move towards the Republicans and basically take a kind of corporatist view of the world. And there's been a real sea change, just in the last few years to actually think maybe it's the right economics, but it's also the right politics. I think this polls very well, to go out and say, look, we are going to point the finger at at who's causing the pain. We're not going to keep giving corporations, letting them off the hook. We know where it's coming from, and we're gonna name them. So I'm encouraged by the Harris proposals. I kind of wish that Biden would have taken a stronger tack while he was in the office. I felt that he was fairly accommodating to the folks who were responsible for inflating prices. He would talk about shrinkflation but I felt he refused to name names. There's a historical analogy. I just want to point out that Kennedy, when he was president, went after the steel companies. He named the industry, and he actually got them to roll back a series of major price increases by basically shaming him, using the bully pulpit. And I never saw Biden do that. It was kind of unfortunate to kind of watch it happen, watch what happened to his presidency as a result.
Right. I mean, there's also, he has difficulties using the bully pulpit. That's one of the problems, really, is he's not able to articulate some of the things that we wish. And I think it's reflected in seeing Harris surge ahead by repeating a lot of the same, I guess, ideas, right, in terms of ideological consistency as it related to things like antitrust in the economy that Biden implemented. But, in terms of housing, right, what do you take I'm less enthusiastic by about the focus on the middle class. I understand the politics behind it, but the focus on the middle class, home ownership, subsidizing home ownership, as opposed to, say, like running on things like we can repeal the Faircloth Amendment so we can build a public housing throughout the country as a way to combat the privatization of housing in this country. But I do like the tackling it from two angles, right? Going after the digital price fixing by these companies on rent while also constructing new homes and providing some sort of assistance for first-time home buyers. But what are the pros and cons? Do you share my view on the mixed bag nature of that?
It is a bit of a mixed bag. And look, if we can't just talk about supply. That's the YIMBY's favorite tact, is basically, again, exonerate the landlords for any kind of culpability for rental inflation. So if we just build and we kind of leave the price fixing, which hopefully is going to be taken care of, but there's another problem that you didn't mention, which is consolidation. And so what are happening is these equity funds are going in and they're buying up large swaths of apartments in the same neighborhood. And so what the YIMBYs and the defenders of the landlords love to do is show stats of how small the holdings are of private equity, across the nation. But of course, they're not just randomly scattering their ownership across the nation. They're targeting very specific neighborhoods, across the United States. And when they come in, they go heavy and they take in big footprints within the neighborhood. That also gives them pricing power. So I want to make sure, I hope that folks in the Harris administration and the economic team are paying attention here. It's not just adding supply, which I like, right? But we also have to come to grips with this notion of we cannot allow a single entity to own, a substantial share of the rental properties in a neighborhood. That's just a recipe for higher prices. You want to get to monopoly prices? Let one person own them all, right? So I wish that they kind of spoke about that a little more often.
Right. I mean, and there is still, I've mentioned Lina Khan a few times already, there is still a question as to whether she will be kept on, even though there is, seemingly ideological consistency on this front. She has not made a statement either way on that issue. And there's a lot of people in the media that are trying to pressure her, specifically big money donors to that campaign, taking the fight to the press because they so desperately want Lina Khan out of there for obvious reasons.
I know Harris could end this whole talk if she just came out right now and said that Lina Khan was going to continue to run the FTC. I kind of wish she would.
Yeah.
But I feel like there was a moment there where we actually thought, I think it was Reid Hoffman, might be controlling the strings. But I feel like Harris has come out so strong on this antitrust and price gouging talking points that it would be just logically inconsistent now turn around and to accommodate kind of the old neoliberal wing of the party. I hope she does the right thing.
I agree. And campaign rhetoric is, yes, just campaign rhetoric, but it's also you lock yourself in for expectations with the voters, right? So this is what you're tying yourself to in terms of your promises to a degree. Although a lot of that depends on the Senate, but we don't need to get fully into the election here, because I wanted to talk about the grocery piece of this and the. That's an industry. I mean, meat processors, right? That is in nearly a monopoly. I saw Robert Reich write this a few months ago, that 4 companies control processing of 80% of beef, nearly 70% of pork, almost 60% of poultry. And so when we were talking earlier about, yes, the naturally incurring inflation due to COVID, we now see that the grocers and these meat companies, right? They basically still have very high prices, but they're taking home record profits. The CNBC is saying, oh, this is price fixing that she wants to do here when she's tackling price gouging. But I mean, this is textbook gouging because you can see it in their earnings reports. They're making record profits, but prices are still high.
Right. So let's talk about the groceries for a bit. I mean, there was a great admission yesterday in the Kroger-Albertsons merger trial by a Kroger executive. This was an internal email that they showed during the trial today, admitting that they were gouging. That is, they were using a little bit of inflation as a pretext to raise their prices by more. And we saw this in spades, going on in the early part of the inflation days, jumping up and down. Again, if we can't see it, if we're not even allowed to talk about price gouging, right, we're never going to get at it. The FTC put out a study that found that large grocery stores were engaging in price gouging. And of course, the Council of Economic Advisors has found that this margin increases were contributing somewhat. They found other factors as well to overall inflation. So this notion, you read this quote from the economist at the top, that the evidence suggests there's never been price gouging. it basically is like burying your head in the sand from all the evidence that's out there.
The Washington Post editorial board said the same thing too. I don't know if it's a coincidence that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post and Whole Foods, but that's another matter.
Yeah, and I don't know how much influence individual writers, but Catherine Rampell, came out and said that, and I'm paraphrasing, but Kamala Harris's discussion of price gouging smacked of communism. She was basically feeding the narrative of communism, and she needed to quit talking about this. She also thought, I just want to, as an antitrust guy, I got to say that antitrust is not going to solve this problem of gouging, right? Antitrust is first primarily focused on price fixing across multiple firms. So when Kroger, gouges unilaterally, that's not something that antitrust can get at. And antitrust can get at an individual firm who's setting prices when they use a restraint of trade to get that price higher. But if they're just exploiting opportunistically, a crisis, there's absolutely nothing that antitrust do, and there's no reason can do, and there's no reason for us to just sit back and kind of take this as consumers, right? I feel like what these neoliberals are saying is that we should let our defenses down. We should have no defenses against this kind of act. And 40 plus states have price gouging laws on the books, right? And we need a federal one because a lot of these states, as Zephyr Teachout wrote, a lot of these firms can evade the state laws if they're doing the gouging in some other state. Or setting it at a different level. And I just put the question this way, like, why would we ever, if we know that there's harm coming from a particular source, why would we ever not build up or erect a defense mechanism, right? Even if we never use it, just to have a defense against this level of attack. It just seems to me naive and almost encouraging firms to misbehave if we don't establish a federal price gouging law.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that antitrust suit against, the FTC's blocking a merger of Kroger's and Albertsons. In their defense, they were essentially listing off, you let Walmart do it, you let X do it. Why don't you let us do this, right? We need to be able to compete in these markets, etc. The point, though, is that the market consolidation has got to that point. So there needs to be a buck. The buck needs to stop somewhere, right? Or you're enabling this, I guess, in terms of the consolidation piece. But also, federalizing these rules would be really important here. And do you think she could do that through executive order, or would that have to go through Congress? Is my question.
I think it would have to go through Congress. If she does it by executive order, it would immediately be challenged. And the courts these days are watching what they're doing to like Biden's student loan programs. I think it should go through Congress. And look, you may never even have to use it. It's just having the defense at your fingertips would put the firms on notice that if they exploit the next crisis, and by the way, this is not price controls and it's not economy-wide, regardless of what Catherine Rampell said. This was just in the food industry. And it really wouldn't kick in until the next crisis. The idea is that when we get into the next crisis, we don't want to be in the same vulnerable position that we were in for this crisis. We're just sitting back and watching these prices spiral out of control. So why not at least have the defense mechanism in place, right? And one last thing is you're not guilty until proven innocent. If the federal government were to bring a case against you, right? You could defend your unilateral price increase by appealing to, say, the costs that went up, right? And if you could demonstrate that your price increases were cost-based, you'd be off the hook. So the notion that this is somehow going to chill investment or innovation or send us back, or, in Catherine's words, communist era, is just a hyperbole.
Well, how about the expanded child tax credit that Kamala Harris is proposing? Is that communism, Hal?
I think that whenever we interfere with markets, it seems like it has a taint of communism, right? Because we're basically saying that we can't trust the markets are going to take care of this. But there's been great research on the advantages, the benefits of a child tax credit, and we basically want to allow people to at least have the choice to go back to work. The notion right now is that childcare is very expensive and it could be trapping folks in their homes and keeping them out of the labor market. So I think it's a great thing, and more power to her on that front as well.
Can you expand on the child tax credit and what it did do when we expanded it during COVID? I think figures range from 40 to 50% of children being lifted out of poverty. She's essentially advocating for making that permanent, which was Joe Manchin killed that in the Build Back Better negotiations, but also offering $6,000 for a newborn for those qualifying families. What impact would that have, and basing that on the impact that it did have when it was in effect?
Well, you mentioned the benefits to children, but I also want to talk about the benefits to the parents as well. I mean, as workers in the labor market, what we want to do is build up this strong sense of security that workers have as a background. And that's going to give them greater bargaining power vis-a-vis their employers, in which they can demand higher wages. So, there's so many beneficial effects, but I do think that we got a taste of it during COVID. We watched what happened in labor markets, and we ought to learn those lessons and apply them generally. We should have strong and vibrant labor markets, and workers should feel secure in leaving and mobility, leaving their current employer and going to a next better job. And we don't want them to feel trapped or feel like because they had kids, it's going to somehow, impair their mobility. So, keep on more of that, and not just during crises. Let's make that permanent.
But that is unfortunately, the Fed has taken an approach of essentially saying that there needs to be a certain level of insecurity in the labor market and some sort of level of unemployment, because they're more focused on the leverage that corporations have, less on the workers. That's just as somebody who works as an economist, right? How robust is that consensus on that front? I'm pretty pessimistic about, the Harris administration being able to break from that economic consensus, because it's even the people in the Biden administration feel that way, or the Janet Yellens of the world.
Well, there was this old paradigm, and it still exists, in the minds of folks like Jason Furman, that workers and wage increases are somehow driving overall inflation. So we have to be careful not to allow the labor markets to overheat too much. But and he made these bold predictions that we wouldn't get inflation down unless unemployment reached something 8 or 9%. I can't remember the number, and that just turned out not to be true. Right? Unemployment remained low, and we came out of the inflationary period. And my thesis all along has been that workers are not contributing to it. If you think about how prices are generated in the economy, ask yourself, does an airline set its prices, based on the salaries that it's paying the flight attendants or the cleaning crew? I mean, it's just preposterous. And so I just want to say something really quick on the Fed. In their defense, I feel like we should go back and revisit the mandate in light of what happened in this episode, right? Their attitude was that they weren't going to start cutting interest rates unless and until they saw unemployment rise. And it basically never did. It didn't do it until just recently. So that was their excuse. I mean, and in part, we're to blame that we set up this mandate. It basically says, if the harm from higher interest rates does not manifest in the form of higher unemployment, don't do anything. Leave interest rates high. But it turned out they were really inflicting massive harms on the economy, right? They were locking people into homes, in their current homes. They were locking people into rentals who wanted to become homeowners because they couldn't afford to finance a mortgage. There were other harms as well, but those harms didn't manifest in the form of unemployment. So the Fed just kind of sat still. And I think it would be a healthy conversation for Congress to have to revisit the mandate and to force the Fed to be sensitive and cognizant to other harms that are inflicted on the economy from higher interest rates. Right now, they just don't feel it, and they don't have to feel it.
It's less, I guess, a criticism of the actions and more of that consensus and what the mandate has, and the outdated nature of the mandate, right? To your point, it's based on an economic consensus that, I don't know, is multiple decades out of date. It just doesn't reflect the reality. And we saw that in the way that unemployment was untethered from the actions of the Fed.
Yeah, there may have been an era, 50, 60 years ago in which wages and prices were inexplicably, intertwined, right? The shoe cobbler and other things like that. But, we've moved on, and it's a different economy now. And we should revisit this notion of how important, wages are to contributing to overall inflation. I would submit not very much.
Lastly here, I wanted to touch on some of her proposals on medicine, medical debt, and your take on that. She basically proposed that she wants to speed up the Biden administration's efforts to allow Medicare to negotiate with drug makers. We know that prices for some of these prescription medications are going to like reduce in 2026 by somewhere from 40 to 80% on these really key drugs that people who are on Medicare use. What does that do for everyday people? And then that as well, her proposal to cancel medical debt. I think it reaffirms your point about just giving the average person more power in the economy.
That's right. But I want to talk about this allowing the government to use its buying power to push down the price of pharmaceuticals. It's amazing that the pharmaceutical lobby was so powerful that they captured large swaths of the Democratic Party, right? For decades. We couldn't even use that tool in our toolkit. And now, to get that legislation through on the first time, right?
The largest buyer of these drugs was barred from negotiate. It wasn't negotiating with the pharmaceutical manufacturers, so they're not using their economic buying power to their leverage in that negotiation. Keep going.
Right, because that would be communism, apparently. And never mind the fact that the drug prices are higher in the United States than anywhere else in the world, right? And so, what's amazing is that how attenuated that first bill had to be to make it through Congress, right? It applied only to a very limited set of drugs, and the notion that it's so natural now we can watch what's happening, right? We can learn the lessons of it, right? Communism did not take hold. We didn't see a drop in innovation or drug companies like leaving the United States, and so why not expand that, across the entire spectrum of drugs? Seems like a brilliant and powerful proposal.
Well, Hal Singer, really appreciate your time today. Professor in the economics department at the University of Utah, executive director of the Utah Project, which is an institute studying antitrust and consumer protection. Thanks so much for your time today, Hal. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a great one.
You too. We are back, folks, and look at that. Brandon Sutton with us.
I'm here.
Say hello. Well, you kind of did. Say hello to Brandon, everybody, and also check out the discourse. What's happening over there?
Yes, I have a new episode out for all the patrons that I posted last night with our thoughts on the DNC and the current possibility of a ceasefire. And we'll be recording another episode either today or tomorrow. I really want to talk about RFK dropping out of the election.
Yeah.
The sort of the time we had with him was short but sweet.
Interesting way to put it. Yeah.
That's what his his brainworm tastes like, short and sweet. It's not, but it's effective. I don't know. Like I don't care that much about RFK. I don't know why. It's just like I'm struggling to care. I do like laughing at the fact that he missed the deadline to withdraw from all these swing states that he said he was going to do. Like he's still going to be on the ballot in Michigan and Wisconsin. Seems.
Yeah, that's so funny. I'm more interested in the slime queen who is sort of turned into like the Lady Macbeth behind the. You're not familiar with this? Nicole Shanahan, obviously the
slime queen.
The slime queen who was his VP pick. Who was also, I think, Sergey Brin's ex, and which is why she became such a giant holder of funds that you could
from Google
donate. Which is always funny because I thought like RFK had a very divorced coded sort of outreach to those sorts of guys, and it was funded lately by money from a divorce, which is interesting. But I forgot how we started talking about this. But Nicole Shanahan, look out for her. She might be president one day.
Left Reckoning, Matt. What's happening on Left Reckoning?
Oh yeah, Left Reckoning had Ben Burgess on, talked about Texas and some other stuff. Check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
And on ESPN, Bradley and I gave you guys some tips for your fantasy draft. So if you're drafting fantasy football in the upcoming week, we're a week away from kickoff. So you can check out that and our tips there, youtube.com/ESPN show. And we're back with Matt Binder, who is back from vacation. Hello, Matt.
Hello. It's so great to be back, seeing you all after that break of time where I wasn't on the Majority Report.
I know.
It's been a while.
How was your? It has been. How was your vacation?
It was good. It was good. Got to miss most of the DNC, which I'm actually happy about.
Very nice.
And yeah.
All right. What's happening on your shows now that you're back in the swing of things?
Well, just got back. So last night I did my first stream back. I did actually jump on the Leftist Mafia stream last week while I was on vacation at the hotel, just to chime in after the at the end of the DNC from what I did see. Yeah, so I did a show last night, just call-ins. It was a good show, catching me up. Had a call in from both Donald Trump and RFK Jr. It was great speaking with both of them.
Everyone has a Donald Trump impression. Everyone tries the voice, but of the presidential candidates, the easiest one to do is RFK. I just think people are afraid to, but they shouldn't be, because
it hurts my throat. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It hurts my throat. It's like I can do a good Alex Jones if I smoke a pack of cigarettes first too, but before
right, it's taxing.
I will say not entirely true. Just ask Kowalski, because he tried to do an RFK before our RFK called in, and it was missing a lot of something.
Whoa! Shots fired. All right, guys. We'll head into the fun half now. 646-257-3920.
You know who has a good, I think Zach from the Vanguard has a good RFK.
Oh, he does? Yeah. Okay. Shout out to the Vanguard. We'll take.
Should we plug our GoFundMe one more time?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Bradley. So this is important, guys. Wow. Look at that. They've almost raised up to their goal.
Yeah, this is guys. We were.
Thank you so much for everybody who donated here.
This was. I think
we were in
around
single-digit thousands.
Yes.
Yes.
I think when we started, we were around 2,000-3,000, or then it was 11,000, and now we're almost at 43,000. So this is really, really amazing.
Amazing.
So, thank you.
Thank you. The link is in the description. Gaza Bakery to feed the displaced families in Gaza. We've previously done a fundraiser with this family, and we were able to get the children over the border into Egypt, including Mohammed's niece, who's organizing this. She has Down syndrome, and months ago, they were able to pay the bribes that they need to get over the border, and now some of the members of the family stayed behind. One of them was killed, but the remaining family members there are giving food to people. And so this is the fundraiser for that purpose. So we first announced this at the start of the week, and it was in the single-digit thousands. Just $10,000 more, less than that actually. Not dollars, actually, I should say euros. Right, that's the euro symbol.
Yeah, euro dollars.
Until to reach that goal. So if folks have anything that they can do, or can donate. Or if you can just spread it around, post it, in group chats or online or on social media. That's a big help too if you don't have any change to spare. So thanks so much to everybody, and link is in the description. All right, see you in the fun half.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this, and I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
wow.
Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker. poker with the boys. Twerk. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Twerk. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
Had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Twerk.
I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here.
Okay, all right. It's not a fun job. Twerk?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Willy Wonka twerk?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered to twerk?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's
twerk?
a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered to twerk?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
Offered to twerk?
That's a real thing. That's
poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion. Real thing. That's
poker with the boys. Offered to twerk?
That's a real thing. That's
poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Twerk? Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, bud.
Twerk? Sushi and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Twerk?
Deluded.
Sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right.
Rangers and Knicks, right?
Now, shut up. You don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best.
Violet twerk?
Don't be foolish. And don't fucking tweet at me. And don't bitch. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
Sorry,
she wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I don't have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
Back.
We are back, folks, and we are in the fun half. We will open up the phone lines now. 646-257-3920 is the phone number. Let's read some IMs. We have a lot. Graz says, a great guest with both Neil Young and Hal Singer. Maybe one or both interviews as a candidate for best of at the end of the year. However, a lot of tough contenders this year. Yes, I want to flag that as well, and Bradley did.
Yeah, I think the first one would definitely be best of, and Hal Singer will be back on this program, I'm
For sure, yeah. Jay Tingle says it's just topical, right? So maybe not for best of, because a lot of things could change. Jay Tingle says if there had been a rush on larger dwellings, as Krugman claimed, that should have freed up a bunch of smaller apartments at lower rents for people with less means. Right. That's not what happened.
It's just funny, like you get one Nobel Prize in for the economy, which I feel like it was just like saying, hey, maybe economists could get this wrong, but my memory is that Krugman got a Nobel Prize for saying the government should deficit spend in bad economic times.
Yeah.
And now he gets to just say like, yeah, I think what's happening to me, which is that I wish I had more office space.
Yeah.
In Manhattan is happening probably to everybody. So that's probably what the economy needs.
But of like all the New York Times columnists that like my dad reads, I'd rather him read Krugman than
also Krugman
others.
was anti-Iraq war, which you know was good.
Yeah. Mr. Spiff Twitch says, I wanted to write in and present a good faith critique of Matt's liberal use of the term Holocaust, but after some light digging, it appears that while the term has been largely associated with Nazi extermination of Jews and other religious and ethnic minorities in World War II, Webster also accepts mass slaughter of people as a definition for Holocaust, so I no longer believe that description is hyperbole.
Yeah, I mean, Shoah is obviously, I think, reserved for the mass slaughter of Jews in World War II, but Holocaust pre-existed World War II. I mean, Nathaniel Hawthorne, 100 years prior to that, had a story called Earth's Holocaust, where there's a giant inferno that destroyed all of like the written words or whatever. Like, but yeah, I think it is appropriate. I think because, and just to and people can opine about other words, but ethnic cleansing, yeah, that's what's going on right now. Also, genocide's going on, but genocide has been happening in a slower form that is more, I think, familiar to the long-term genocide of Native Americans in this country. So, like, I think those terms aren't adequate to what we're seeing right now. And was it Greenberg Call mentioned that Shoah and Nakba translate the same way in terms of Holocaust, and I think that's appropriate.
Yeah. Sam and Dave's Vacation says, I would imagine that the lavender scare would have a different meaning for Sam Seder, and then a nose and puff emoji. Yes.
That's when an in-studio guest comes in wearing
perfume. Jay Tingle, at Hoover's funeral, the honor guard presented the triangle folded flag to Tolson. Yeah. I mean, look. Going on. If Clint Eastwood makes a movie about it, and says you're gay in the movie, and basically that's the entirety of the plot for the most part, it's pretty well documented. Mama Philistopheles says, did you know about the gay Nazi Ernst Röhm? He was an openly gay man in the Nazi Party who helped Hitler with selling his propaganda in the early days of the Nazis, including railing against Magnus Hirschfeld and his Institute of Sex